Here we go. Okay, well, welcome to Jesus TV. We're broadcasting in Jesus land. It's also called the Jesus verse, which is like the metaverse, but it's a Jesus themed land, and it's created by Jesus, and it's being created by Jesus. In particular, I'm broadcasting out of what's called Jesus TV. We're simulcast on Jesus Radio, which is, well, just what you would think. It's a Jesus television station. And this is episode 2 of Suffer Well, Healed by His Stripes. And that, of course, refers to the fact that we are healed by Jesus's stripes, that Jesus, one of his superpowers is he was able to suffer well. And in the course of that, we have been blessed by his stripes. We've been healed by his stripes. So the last episode we did was back in June. That was episode 1, and it was called Amazing, which introduced the topic of Suffer Well. And tonight, we have with us Aaron Smith, who is an architect, engineer, and designer in early Zion. Aaron, like me, has been called by God to build a world which is expressed both virtually and physically. So those are two things that occupy a lot of our energies and times that we talk about. And tonight's episode is called WakeNOsis. And that, like, I've never heard of that term. Well, you just did. And so in Aaron's Jesus world and in my Jesus world, that term is being introduced. And we'll talk about terminology as we go along. Aaron, we have Jesus has created a script for most of this. So there's going to be improv. And this is your first time on Jesus TV. Feel free to interrupt if you've got comments along the way. And I'm going to just start reading from the script and discussing things. But like I say, just I don't have to have the talking stick the whole way, but we're glad to have you join us. Any other comments you want to make before we dive into the episode?
Sure. Yeah, just a little bit about suffering well. I watched this video way back in June, and I was really blown away by Jesus had me get blown away by watching you and Jonathan talk about this topic. And he's really made that become obvious in my life. I mean, even before this episode, had to do a little bit of suffering well as I was juggling some commitments and different things and learning how to trust him versus trying to do harder. It's like, okay, what do I do? Just breathe, and the anxiety will all flow through and it'll all make sense. And I think that's really the trick to connecting with Jesus or with love. And that's the big secret that I've been changing my life tremendously, is I'm learning to talk to Jesus, my imaginary friend. He's very real, and he's just guiding me through life instead of me trying to do things on my own.
Excellent. Well, good introduction. So I'm going to go to the script. One way that Jesus has been retraining me to suffer well, or we could call it suffer better, is by creating for me a hypnosis Jesus themed scripts, or Jesus rituals, customized Jesus songs, and a host of Jesus world structures that lead my heart and my mind into a ponderful, peaceful, meditative state that is, to me, like some kind of hypnotic, otherworldly state. Now, what I'm going to do here says improv, because Jesus will sometimes go, you don't need to write that. You can just go improv. So as I open to my mind every day when I wake up, this is how you enter into my Jesus Greg world, at least how I enter into it, is every morning, like Groundhog Day. I have a series of things, and Jesus keeps adding to those, but we're building out the morning scene, which is waking with Jesus and the angels. And I have these scripts that I follow that involve music, they involve motion, and various things. And at the core of this world building that Jesus is doing with me is an underlying story. It's called the Jesus story. And so I'm reminded of that continually, that we live in a state of consciousness, which we call reality, and there are alternative realities. And so when we wake up normally, we just assume that that's reality, but there are alternative realities, like mixed realities. And so what Jesus is teaching me how to do is to mix up the reality. Whereas before, for years and years, like close to 56, 57 years, my reality just kind of presented itself, it seemed. Now, if you go to the School of Life, how to narrate your story, you'll hear them present a very convincing case that we all have been trained how to tell a story. And that's what creates our reality, that we're always telling a story. We're always inserting ourselves into a narrative. And what this episode is about is exploring how that story creates kind of like a trance. And you don't have to use that term trance, but scripturally, the term trance, like sleepiness, has been used by the prophets of old. They call it the sleep of hell. Pink Floyd calls it being comfortably numb. And that's kind of how I would wake up my whole life, just like comfortably numb. And it was nice when I was comfortably numb when I woke up. There was not much going on in the head. And, you know, you're just kind of slowly going. And in America and most places in the world, you get those processes going by getting some caffeine in you, maybe some coffee or other things, some stretches, and not necessarily like a Jesus themed wake up, but that's what Jesus started doing to me. And it started bringing to my attention, like, whoa, we got something going on here. And you'll see in the script, Jesus brings that to my attention. And this is what led to WakeNOsis, this episode. All right. But I just wanted to point out that initial thing that is overarching. It's an arc that informs the entire Jesus world building experience, that there's an ongoing story. And Jesus, when you start getting more Jesus, he'll start manipulating that story. He'll start changing that story. And I like it. Okay. So he's been training me, which training is giving me greater peace under pressure. So I wouldn't do what I'm doing. I wouldn't even do these Jesus episodes if it wasn't working, but it is working. So I'm doing it. I'm seeking more of it too. So this episode was introduced to me by Jesus when he asked me, Jesus talks to me. It was after the morning wake up scene with Jesus that I just described. I wake up, sing some Jesus songs. And Jesus said, and I paraphrase Jesus because you know how he talks differently, but this is how I'd interpret it. It was like, what is that, Greg, that I'm doing with you? What is it like, Greg? And I replied, it's kind of like hypnosis, Lord. It's like you're hypnotizing me or having me do some kind of self-hypnosis thing. Now, Jesus has already taught me early on about self-reinforcements, that if you want to change your reality, if you want a more Jesus reality, you can't just sit there and go like, okay, do it to me, Jesus. He will say, help me help you. It's kind of the standard practice. He delivers you by making you powerful unto your deliverance. And so one of the key terms here that we'll talk about is called self-reinforcement. We can reinforce the things that Jesus is saying, or we can multiply them or magnify them. So we talk about magnifying our priesthood. We can magnify or amplify what Jesus, the still small voice, is saying, because sometimes we need to. We need to say, now what was that? Okay, I need to say that louder. And so that we do it ourselves in the name of Christ, through the Spirit of Christ, and we amplify that. And what you're going to see in this episode is that's really what we're talking about here, that hypnosis is one way in which to reinforce or focus someone's mind upon something. WakeNOsis is just a term to describe the same kind of thing. And we'll see where it goes. So back to the episode. So I thought this episode was going to be all about hypnosis. and hypnosis approximations. But as I started to hear Jesus in this episode, it started shaping up differently with a wider scope than just hypnosis. It started having to do with the prophecy related to Jesus world building, Zion, and the application of Article Faith 11. And so at this starting moment, what you're going to hear, Aaron, is I'm going to start talking about Article Faith 11 and hypnosis. Some people aren't comfortable with that term. So that's what this first part is. Excuse me.
I want to say something if it's okay.
Go ahead. What's that?
So I like the word WakeNOsis because a lot of people are having, we call it a spiritual awakening.
Can you get closer to your mic? I can't hear you.
Sure. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's better. Yeah, but you're like far away compared to where you were. I wonder what's wrong.
Let me, I just took my earpieces out. They're kind of.
There we go. That's all the difference. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say WakeNOsis. I like that because it symbolizes. Is that the right word?
Symbolizes, yep.
Yeah, it's about waking up, which, people are going through spiritual awakenings now, and so forth. And also, in the scriptures, it talks about, awaken, arise, and take off the shackles, and those kind of phrases. So WakeNOsis is just like a spiritual awakening, but of course we do it with Jesus here in Jesus world.
That's right.
But yeah, so I just wanted to share that.
Nope, good. I like it. Anticipates what we're going to talk about. Article Faith 11. This is the forward of this episode. In this episode, I'm going to use the words hypnosis and hypnotizing in ways that other people, certain perhaps other Christians or certain other LDS people, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, I'm a born-again member of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, as is Aaron. We're using that term in a way that they prefer not to use. They would probably prefer that I use other words that are not connected to hypnosis, hypnotize, and hypnotizing. That's what they would do. That's what Jesus would lead them to do. I have no doubt. That's fine. Under Article Faith 11, we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may. But here's the thing. I'm not them. I'm not other people. I'm Greg. God knows I'm not them. I'm not you. I'm Greg version 2022. So here we go. If you stay around here long enough, meaning if you stay within my Jesus Greg world, you will notice that in my Jesus Greg world, which is where you are right now, by the way, in a sector of Jesus land, also called my personal place in Jesus verse at my Jesus TV station, which is Jesus's TV station, you will notice that Jesus has me use words and phrases and concepts that may be new, unfamiliar, and or mashups of words. What's this WakeNOsis stuff? And these phrases and concepts that in your own world mean something different than they do to me. And so that's the nature of language. That's the nature of actually culture. So Jesus is introducing me to a new culture. And of course, with a new culture, in the beginning was the word, new language. And sometimes it's a mashup language. So for instance, one of the phrases that both Aaron and I use, we talk about Jesus being an imaginary friend who is real. Now that's a mashup. Now I wouldn't feel comfortable about calling Jesus imaginary without also adding the phrase, who is real. That'd be like saying Jesus is sour. Well, this is true. He's also sweet. And so mentioning those things in combination, yin and yang, light and dark. Jesus is in the dark. He's in the light. Those things are balancing to me. For some people, like, no, I just want to talk about Jesus in the light, Jesus in the light. And that's fine. You can do that. But for some reason, Jesus has put it both in Aaron's heart and my heart to emphasize one of the things that's like the elephant in the room. Hey, have you noticed Jesus is invisible? And he is. It's a huge, huge problem for worshiping Jesus. If he was like visible to these eyes and I could hear him with these ears, wow, it'd be a whole different world. But instead, that's what the whole scripture's got to testify of Jesus. You have to self-reinforce and maybe even have prophets whispering from the dust trying to help you reinforce. Come on, believe in something you can't see. And we're going to call it faith. And we'll try to encourage you, say, that's what it is all about. But oftentimes they're not drawing strong attention to his invisibility, even though it's implied. I have to, for whatever reason, have to bring those things together right there. And so when Jesus says, what's this like? And I say, it's like hypnosis. Well, I just entered into a territory that's not going to make everybody feel comfortable. In fact, when I shared some of the preliminary of this episode that Jesus gave me with my wife and daughter, is like, no, I don't like that term. So you'll see this addressed here just one moment. It's going to be like that in early Zion and then in eventual Zion, where Jesus is going to be gathering people from a wide variety, from a wide spectrum, who have different backgrounds and different needs. They have different languages.
I'd like to share something here too that's coming to
Yes.
mind. So I think a lot about the hip hop culture. And there's a guy I watch, I think his name is called One Quest or something like that. He's from like the 80s, like one of the original hip hoppers back in the 80s or late 70s. And he talked about when they created this hip hop culture, you know, this was in New York. I think he's from New York. And just talked about how they lived in a dark place. You know, they felt oppressed. They were in poverty. Nothing's really happy. There's a lot of things to be sad about. And one of the things they did, they started changing their language and started using, you know, different words to mean different things. And they gave them power and creativity and helped create this new culture where they could thrive and do their thing and feel what they needed to feel and not be so, you know, felt in the darkness. And so I like this. I like this. Jesus has you and me mashing up languages. We're creating this new culture that's a Jesus culture, and we see the light, even though we're sitting in perhaps a dark place or whatnot. And we're sitting here happy as can be, while everything around us is like, oh, there's no reason to be happy.
Right. And that's what suffering well's about. That abjectly, it might be like you're in a situation that's pitiful, but if you conceive it right, because maybe God is giving you the power, and sometimes how he gives you that power is the power of the word. He just changes the story, and all of a sudden you're okay with something that you weren't, and all it was a story. I'm here with you, Jesus says. And then but of course, it works like the placebo effect. You believe, and then because you believe, well, then it is. And it's the nature of what we're dealing with. And so I like the hip hop thing where people can take, because God gives it to them, words and start creating a new reality that is in contrast to the abject or the obvious reality. And they begin essentially to create a new world, a new spiritual world within maybe kind of a low, dark place, but they bring light to it. And that's the nature of our spiritual beings. We can do that through Christ. Jesus wants me to introduce the following episode on WakeNOsis, a term that in my Jesus Greg world refers to, sorry, I had COVID world. A term that in my Jesus Greg world refers to the godly form of hypnosis. Could there be such a thing, a godly form of hypnosis? Or if you prefer, the godly hypnosis approximations. That term approximations let you get away with all kinds of words.
I love that word.
I wasn't talking about hypnosis per se. I was talking about something that's like hypnosis. I know you like that word. So do I. It's a cheater word. You can say anything as long as you say approximation. Oh, I was approximating that. Correct.
Just put that on the test. Approximation answers. Oh, right. Straight A.
Yes, that's right. And this is all done within the framework of Article Faith 11. God wants me to acknowledge and emphasize, and thereby take advantage of for learning purposes, the different ways that hypnosis is viewed by different people. I want to acknowledge that. Bottom line, I am to frankly acknowledge here, right now in this episode, some people would never suggest or agree that Jesus would ever use or condone the use of hypnosis or any approximations of hypnosis. That is fine. Within a body of deep Christians, be they LDS or otherwise, you are going to find certain Christians who want to have nothing at all to do with the word and connotations of hypnosis, let alone the practice of hypnosis. Their understanding, their cultural understanding, maybe their higher understanding, sees hypnosis in any form as unholy, not of God, akin to witchcraft, sorceries, etc. It's not that way for me, and it's probably not that way for Aaron as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm pretty loose.
yeah, and honestly,
Flexible.
if you dived into any of these Christian churches, including the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, you would find devout members who are like therapists. They're practicing hypnosis. They don't say a hypnosis approximation, and that's just the nature of it. It doesn't. I'm not saying it's okay, but it's okay in my world. But I can't. It's Article Faith 11. It's covered by that. So
So the big thing, if I can interject,
yes,
so I
do.
think a lot of we fear stuff we don't understand, right? I mean, back in the day, they used to think lightning was like the devil's magic or something like that.
Right.
And then once we understand it, we're like, oh, okay, we understand. And then we're able to use lightning or or electricity to give us a better world, if you will. And to me, these kind of things like hypnosis and getting the chakras and different things, those are just like technologies or tools that the Lord's given us that can be used for good or bad, just like a computer can be used, you know. And so it's just and of course you do what Jesus puts in your heart. He'll tell you how he wants you to use it. But yeah, I think as an architect and engineer, it's kind of like we have all these tools. We're trying to design something, so we're using whatever we can, as long as Jesus tells us to use these things and emphasize that. But yeah, I think that's perhaps why I'm not so like, oh, I'm just more curious and I want to learn. I mean, I don't condone controlling people. That's not Jesus at all. But I do like the idea of using this thing that's going to help me get into a better state where I can suffer well.
Yes. And so I like what you say. Um, and so um, when I was, it's probably on my mission or years ago, I read somebody, and it was kind of authoritative. I can't remember who it was. This is the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and they were basically bashing hypnosis, that it conflicted with agency, that if you're overcoming smoking through some suggestion, that's of the devil. And I can't resolve that. I'm not a doctrinaire. Hallelujah, Jesus. I'm not an apologist. I'm a friend of Jesus. And so I defer to the authorities, but that's for like other people, but I defer to Jesus, and he's leading me this way. I'm like, okay. And you can see he's having me talk very carefully about it. So he must at least know that he wants me, because this episode got hijacked by Jesus. The Jesus episode did. I'm like, well, we're going to talk a lot about like, hey, do what you want to do, Article Faith 11, whatever Jesus has you talk about. But I liked it. I thought, oh, that's appropriate, so that not so that I can pave the way, so that I can say, okay, now I'll find you a way you can believe in hypnosis. No, just to acknowledge it and appreciate him in a deeper way, because this is what Jesus is putting in my heart. That's like very important, more important than WakeNOsis, is honoring other people's beliefs at different times in their life. That's what they need to believe, and my own as well, realizing Jesus will change them. So maybe I'll be all about hypnosis and WakeNOsis, and then 10 years from now, like, nah, I don't do that anymore. That was a thing I did. I'm okay with that. But right now, Jesus, like I say, he's put it in my heart. He goes, what's this like? So that's kind of an introduction to what this episode is. Now we'll kind of dive into the hypnosis, WakeNOsis discussion. And this is where we look at this definition, hypnotize. So hypno, I think is Greek or something. I don't know. Look it up yourself. It has to do with sleep. So I could see like putting yourself to sleep. And that's why I like WakeNOsis.
Yeah.
It's like, and in both cases, like when you go to sleep, you start entering a different reality. Well, when you wake up, you do, because that's what I started this episode by saying. Jesus is doing some strange thing to me, where he's taken me to a different state, a wake-up state. And so in that sense, it's like hypnosis, like a trance-like state. And it's familiar. So as we discuss this here in a few minutes, we'll realize that as humans, we use music, we use dance, we use movies to move ourselves into different states of being. And You don't have to refer to those as hypnosis, but right now in this episode, we're like, maybe these are kind of like that. And that's what Jesus wants me to explore and to acknowledge. Okay, so hypnosis, the noun, produce a state of hypnosis in someone. A witness had been hypnotized to enhance his memory. So that's interesting because WakeNOsis, Jesus is trying to do that. He's trying to help me remember him always by creating, and you'll see some scripts and so forth. Similar words to hypnosis: mesmerize, send into a trance, put under, put out, put to sleep, capture the whole attention of someone. I like that because the first song I sing says, Jesus, our only joy be thou, as thou our prize will be. So he intends to capture my whole attention. That, wow, you're big into Jesus. Well, his intention is like everything's Jesus focused. And that's kind of like otherworldly, if you will. Introduction. Have you noticed that there's a precision and an exact hypnotic repetitiveness to the sacrament prayer and sacrament worship services? Okay, so now I'm comparing like WakeNOsis, hypnosis. Go ahead and use whatever term you like. I'm just going to talk freely with my mouth, but you know, WakeNOsis was a nice little placeholder. But starting to pay attention to, as humans, one of the things we do, even in our deep religious, some of the most precious, deep religious things, we move ourselves into a state, we call it a spiritual state of being, a spiritual mind. But how do you do that? Through repetitiveness, through cadence. What cadence? Have you ever heard of a sacrament song? Yes, you'll sing songs, you'll create a hushed tone. Wow, that sounds like a seance, right? I mean, it has an approximation. That's what you do too. I'm sure the Satanists would say, settle down. We need to get serious about this cantations and so forth. Because in order to do whatever, connect with the devils, you probably have to have some kind of evil reverence rather than just kind of spazzy reference. And so Aaron and I were born spazzes. So we even can control ourselves and try to get in a state of mind, right, Aaron? Where we take the sacrament thoughtfully and dare I say, meditatively, and also maybe not a trance, but kind of like a trance where you're transforming your being, you're anticipating a transformation of your consciousness, and you're trying to enter into this connection. It's called communion with God. And so, no, it's probably not hypnosis, but I like to call it WakeNOsis. At least I'd like, yeah, it kind of wakes you up, and you're like, well, what were you before? Oh, I was just kind of distracted. Well, it was like you were asleep, right? You were asleep to the things of God. Not that you were like devil worshiping. It's just simply you weren't paying attention. And of course, that's what it's all about in hypnosis. Pay attention to me, you know, getting that attention. But Jesus wanted to draw attention to these religious rituals. There's temple rituals within our Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saint faith. There's prayer rituals, and those create a state of mind. So I want to go ahead, Aaron, if you had any comments.
Oh, just so suffering well here. I'm got mosquitoes out here getting me, so that's why I looks like I got the wiggles or
that's all right.
There, so.
That's right. Yeah,
it's all good though.
Jesus is challenging your suffering well. Yeah, and we'll tie it back to suffering well.
Jesus gave his blood for me so I can give some blood to the mosquitoes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I want to tie it back to suffering well, the theme. So there are states of mind that you can achieve where you can suffer better, or even called suffer well. And that's so as I'm building my Jesus Greg world with Jesus and the angels, and as Aaron building his, Jesus is emphasizing these repetitive rituals that help our minds focus upon him and enter a state that's a more peaceful state. And so I want to draw that attention. Let's see. It's as if Jesus has set up certain religious worship to put us in a certain state of mind, not unlike a mild meditative contemplative trance. I noticed this in other hypnotic aspects of worship lately because Jesus is putting into my heart to understand that he is building into my Jesus Greg world features that create within me hypnotic approximations. What did Greg just say? Jesus is hypnotizing Greg? No, I think Greg said Jesus is doing some kind of hypnotic approximation. What's the difference? I don't think there is a difference. I just think Greg is suggesting Jesus uses hypnosis, but to make viewers comfortable by doing one of those approximation mashup hypnosis like mushy and inexact talks. I think that's what he's doing. Well, maybe he is. I don't know. For the longest time, Jesus has had me edit and then re-edit and then edit again and again my Jesus story. So at www.getmorejesus.com, that's one of the scripts that I read repeatedly. In fact, before this episode, I was editing it and emphasizing. It's like, okay, so when I read this, I want to emphasize this. It's like I was writing a script very carefully, meant to make my mind do certain things and think certain things. Well, you're going to see that in the intensity of these edits, meaning the drawing force Jesus brings to my heart to make these edits, gives me a great sense of urgency, a direness to make sure I write down the things Jesus reveals to me in the first part of my Jesus story. And that's because that's how it's recreated every day, this Jesus world. And this is so almost anytime Jesus changes and improves the opening script in my Jesus world. Now, lately, it is dawning on me that what Jesus is creating, he's creating some kind of sequenced word, image, sound, motion, and other sensory mashup that he wants me to feed my head and heart each morning to start a hypnosis approximation, a WakeNOsis. In many ways, which we will discuss in this episode, my Jesus hypnosis script could be compared to Ericksonian hypnotherapy scripts found on the internet here. And we're not going to go to those scripts, but you could look up https www.hypnosis.com/all-scripts. Erickson hypnotherapy scripts. I'll just read you a little bit of this. 1,250 hypnosis scripts from uncommon knowledge, subtle, metaphor-packed Ericksonian hypnotherapy scripts with pre-hypnosis chat and naturalistic inductions written by professional hypnotherapy trainers. Our hypnosis scripts are written with the hypnotherapist in mind. Subtle language techniques, careful rhythm and pacing, deep metaphors, and artful analogies all go to make a hypnosis script that will give you, the hypnotherapist, new and elegant ideas for how to help your clients. Each script contains hypnotherapy chat, often laden with reframes and therapeutic suggestions, followed by the hypnotherapy script itself. The scripts have been professionally edited and annotated with suggestions for emphasis, timing, and rhythm. You can see an example on the scripts page below. All the scripts are prepared in Adobe Acrobat PDF format and are easily printed out. Okay, so the big difference between these Ericksonian hypnosis scripts and the ones Jesus is giving me in my Jesus Greg world is, of course, that Jesus and his angels have been writing up a script that is custom fit for my life's mission and circumstances. It is being built line upon line, precept upon precept, and I have to do a lot of editing. It's being built not after the manner which is learned by man, Ericksonian or otherwise, nor after the manner of man, but instead, these scripts that Jesus is writing for me in my Jesus Greg world are being written in a manner which Jesus does show me. Jesus is the best script writer when I #hear him. Why Jesus? Because the scripts that need to be written in the latter days must have a power unlike the world has ever seen. Okay, any comments, Aaron?
Um, no, just getting away from the mosquitoes.
That's no problem. So, so a lot of what I do.
Oh, I did want to say I really
Go
like.
ahead.
So I think the word WakeNOsis is really cool because hypnosis is the idea of going to sleep and getting controlled by someone, and WakeNOsis is kind of the opposite. It's being awake and having more agency.
Yep,
That's how Jesus works, and then we choose to follow him because we just love him so much.
I like it. Yeah,
I
that's
think
right.
that's the way heaven works.
Yep, I like it. What I once again feel that strong force from Jesus when I #hear him to capture this hypnosis insight, which I'm doing by writing and producing this episode of Jesus TV. In fact, Jesus had me place this hypnosis insight near the top, the very first part of my Jesus Greg world. So I've got that script at www.getmorejesus.com. And this episode is actually going to have a link there. So this episode will pop up. And meaning that it is very likely this hypnosis insight will be brought to my attention every single morning for the rest of my life in my Wake Up with Jesus scene as part of the hypnosis therapy, the WakeNOsis therapy that Jesus is delivering me to for a wise purpose in him. Therefore, I realize this is no small episode. It's a very important one. I sense that Jesus wants me to be aware that he is essentially having me do what he is or will soon have other people do who build their respective Jesus worlds, creating a structure and a system for WakeNOsis, or you could call it hypnosis approximation. And so before I go to the next subject, I just want to round that up to say this episode, my focus is towards saying, what is Jesus doing here? What are you doing with me, Lord? And that's the underlying thing. And then he says, describe it. And I'm describing it because it has similar things. I don't have Ericksonian scripts, but I do have Jesus scripts. I've got 115 songs from Jesus that are classic rock mashups that wouldn't be appropriate for other people's worlds, but they're appropriate for mine. They're custom fit to wake me up or bring my attention to certain things. And those songs include actually some traditional hymns as well. And they have an effect on me. And I've noticed that. And
So I'd like to share a little
go
too.
ahead.
So I've been kind of going through the same experience where it's like a song comes to my head and Jesus has me change the words. And then I listen to that song over and over during certain parts of my day, or even just other parts. It's like, hey, listen to this song. I'm having a hard time or whatnot. And also I want to emphasize that, to a skeptic or a non-believer, they're like, well, you're just making that up, which, yeah, it can look like that. And that's what it looks like. But also that's more emphasis of how it's like, if you want to say, oh, he's just hypnotizing himself. So it's actually not necessarily someone's controlling you. You're allowing yourself to make yourself better.
Yeah, and I would call what you're using is the sacred imagination.
Yeah,
And that's a
yep.
mashup rather than say you're just using your imagination. No, you're using a sacred imagination, which kind of implies it's like design, creation. Well, there's intelligent design. There's design, then there's intelligent design, and the word intelligence suggests there's somebody behind this. So you're saying there's an intelligence. And that's called a faith statement. We're believing in things which are not seen, which are true, and they're true according to witnesses of ancient peoples and current people who say, now Jesus is real. He does do things. He does miracles, and you can hear him. You can #hear Jesus if you listen carefully. And we're like, yeah, I think I hear him saying this, and then we start adjusting our life story, maybe even adjusting a song, and then putting that in our lives, and maybe in a repetitious fashion that starts looking like some kind of cult. Hallelujah. Yeah, because guess what we've been in? Babylon is like one of the most powerful cults. You want to talk about hypnosis? Woo, it's all around you. Walmart employs psychologists to hypnotize you when you're shopping, because they do not want you awake, putting things in your cart that you only need. They want you to stick things in there that you want or that your subconscious wants. And so advertising and everything creates So if people say, I'm not into hypnosis, oh my goodness. Well, hypnosis is in you. If you live in a normal society, you have to work to wake up from that and go, hold it, what did I put in my car? Why did I do that? And they don't want you asking that question. That question is like WakeNOsis. You're being too ponderful. Now you're praying, Jesus, I don't want to have anything in this car that you don't want. Oh, okay, bye-bye. And now you're starting to do that kind of thing. That's very disruptive to a consumer society, and you're ruining it for the rest of us. You need to buy stuff you don't need. That's what it's all based upon. And so, comfortably numb. Here we go, back to the script. Okay, sometimes, even often, you must do the things that Jesus tells you to do when you hear him, often with little to no clue why Jesus is commanding you to do so. Sometimes the things Jesus has me do even look foolish, not just to others, but to myself. He is a God of mystery after all. However,
Why
Jesus
am I
is,
doing this?
what's that?
So it's like, why am I doing this? But I'm trusting this. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's why.
You and I have been bold, and I appreciate your boldness. Yeah, we're doing whack stuff, but it kind of fits our personality. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily for everybody else, but
Yeah.
we're trying to do it in Christ. And then we just like, oh, that looks kind of weird. But we like, when I hashtag hear him, this is what he tells me to do. And that is called faith. That's stepping out on that limb, because we know we're not getting lots of fans by doing that, other than one, and it's Jesus. He goes, oh, I see those guys trying. However, Jesus is also a God of truth and light. And eventually Jesus will, when and if he wants, reveal to you and me, at least in part, why he was or is having you do such and such. He will, if he wants, explain the underlying logic of his seemingly strange ways. Like the Karate Kid moment. Why was I painting a fence? Why was I sanding a floor? Why was I waxing your car? And then you have that moment where you're like, whoa, I know karate. So you were having me do weird stuff, cleanup stuff, to teach me the movements of karate. And so that's one of the things that Jesus will do. Well, this for me is one of those moments when Jesus is telling me about why and how Jesus is building my Jesus Greg world and certain features therein. So what I'm saying in this episode to myself is, Greg, Jesus is right now telling you with WakeNOsis that these things he's been doing have an effect on your mind and heart that you don't understand. It's a technology that you've just been doing. It's just because Jesus tells you to do. But then I start thinking that this stuff works. And like, and I become curious because God puts the curiosity. Why do you think it works? I'm like, oh, it's kind of like hypnosis. Yeah, let's call it WakeNOsis. But it's that's what you can do. I'm like, oh, so I can, through the power of my faith and intent, I can actually draw down powers of heaven. Like there's gifts that are just waiting, and all I got to do is believe. Well, how can I get myself to believe? I don't know. Would a song help? Yeah. And this song, and then it starts helping. And
Well, I think this ties into as well. This just came to mind. A lot of self-help classes and like someone who wants to be a great person or build a business and live the great life. A lot of it requires affirmations and the same kind of technology
yes,
as well. So it's not necessarily, they could call it hypnosis, I guess, to some degree, but it's, so there's varying degrees of it that
yeah,
is
and
more
it's called
acceptable.
self-reinforcement, positive affirmations, all kinds of terms, just like there's all kinds of different religions. And we'll let Jesus mop them up.
But the biggest difference between this and anything else is that we're just doing what Jesus tells us to do. And he's using the same technology,
Yeah,
but
that's right. That's
I think
right.
that's really the only difference. And that little difference makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's right. It's just simply that's how he's operating with us. And so we're just declaring it to ourselves first, like, what are you doing here? And this is what this is. So this is one of those moments where he's telling me what's going on. And it's interesting and telling that this explanation from Jesus comes at a time when I started to notice that my mind and heart are somehow being, as it were, programmed in a very mysterious fashion to focus on Jesus and to love Jesus with all my heart, might, mind, and strength. I've been marveling lately whatever Jesus has been having me do, and it is a list of strange to me and other things Jesus has me do. They are actually working for me. I'm getting substantial results. This episode of Suffer Well, Healed by His Stripes, is mine and Jesus's peculiar way of installing this hypnosis understanding that Jesus is giving me and others about Jesus world building. And so here's the thing. Jesus TV, so like this episode I'm doing, I'm emphatically saying things. I've got an episode. It's part of the hypnosis, the WakeNOsis. I'm telling myself, and I can hear myself. Who else can hear me? I don't know. Aaron can, but I'm like, yeah, this is kind of convincing. And well, who came up with these words? Jesus did. What would non-believers say? Well, they'd say you're coming up with your own words, Greg, to convince yourself that Jesus is talking to you and that he's putting these scripts together. I'd say, yeah, that's the low glory story that has no Jesus in it. I'm in Jesus land. So take that over to Mark of the Beast land, or you can call it the metaverse, whatever. We're over here in Jesus land where everything ultimately is being done by Jesus. He's present. And so that's what I'm trying to reinforce. That's why I'm staying in Jesus land, talking about Jesus stuff. Caveat, in this episode, I will refer to God and the devil and humans using hypnosis. Now, I'm not an expert on hypnosis. Therefore, the statement I feel most secure about is, you already heard that, hypnosis approximation. Let's see.
Yeah.
This episode, I'm going to skip to that. We already kind of covered this.
Okay.
This episode will focus on the basic understandings of hypnosis and how Jesus is or might be using hypnosis, or at least forms of hypnosis, WakeNOsis, in the retraining of my mind and heart within my Jesus Greg world that Jesus is building with me. When I did hear him, Jesus explained to me that both Jesus and Satan use hypnosis approximations to capture our attention. And that's what I spoke of, that if you live in U.S. Antichrist, all is well in Zion, Babylon cult culture, or in other words, normal U.S. culture, you are walking around hypnotized so much. And the marketers are counting on it. And you say, well, it's not bad. It's freaking way bad. That's why our society, if anybody noticed, it's going down. It's because it's going down with sleepers, because they're bringing their attention to money and things like that. Well, I didn't mean to pay so much attention. I know they built a whole structure to focus on something that is dead, what Christ would call dead. Money is dead. Christ is alive, okay? And he can redeem money, he can make it lively, but generally it's dead. It does not lead to life. It leads to more money, but that's just more death. And so it's a interesting thing. Let's see, okay. They use hypnosis, Jesus and Satan, all right? And that we as humans, we can and we do employ the same hypnosis technology to self-reinforce our beliefs, our feelings, and our commitments towards truth or error, whatever we are seeking over time. Briefly discuss Jesus world building and how we are acquiring from Jesus basic foundational understandings of what lies beneath. I just talked about that. So this is what this is. Jam session set list. There's okay. There's an article by the National Institutes of Health by Ann Williamson called "What is Hypnosis and How Might It Work?" Jesus led me to this in preparation for this episode. Okay. And so I'm going to go to it and I'll read a little part of it.
Sit over here.
Okay, get ready because I'm going to go fast.
Okay, I'm ready.
Hypnosis can be seen as a waking state of awareness. Isn't that interesting? So we talked about WakeNOsis. Hypnosis can be seen as a waking state of awareness or consciousness in which a person's attention is detached from his or her immediate environment and is absorbed by inner experiences such as feelings, cognition, and imagery. Hypnotic induction involves focusing of attention and imagination involvement. Get that, imagination involvement to the point where what is being imagined feels real. Ha ha, right? My imaginary friend who is real. So hypnotic induction or wakenotic induction, waking up, but by the use and acceptance of suggestions, okay, the clinician and patient construct a hypnotic reality, or in our case, a wakenotic reality, a Jesus reality is what I like to call it. Everyday trance states are part of our common human experience, such as getting lost in a good book, driving down a familiar stretch of road with no conscious recollection when in prayer or meditation, or when undertaking a monotonous or creative activity. Our conscious awareness of our surroundings versus an inner awareness is on a continuum, so that when in these states, one's focus is predominantly internal, but does not necessarily lose all outer awareness. Hypnosis could be seen as a meditative state, which one can learn to access consciously and deliberately for therapeutic purposes. Suggestions are then given either verbally or using imagery directed at a desired outcome. This might be to allay anxiety by accessing calmness and relaxation, help manage side effects of medications, or help ease pain. So we're talking about suffer well, there you go. Help ease pain or other symptoms. Depending on the suggestions given, so what kind of suggestions does Jesus give me? Get more Jesus. I am here, Greg. Rest in my peace. I have lots of money, and I'll give you all you need, Greg. Depending on the suggestions given, hypnosis is usually a relaxing experience, which can be very useful with a patient who is tense or anxious. However, the main usefulness of hypnotic state is the increased effectiveness of suggestion and access to mind-body links or unconscious processing. Hypnosis can not only be used to reduce emotional distress, but also may have a direct effect on a patient's experience of pain. So two people with similar circumstances, one might have WakeNOsis. They may be singing spiritual hymns out and while they're picking cotton as slaves in Georgia, and slaves beside them are experiencing a whole lot more pain because they're not caught up in a spiritual song that creates a spirit that focuses on Christ. WakeNOsis or hypnosis itself is not a therapy, but it is a tool that facilitates the delivery of therapy in the same way as a syringe delivers drugs. Hypnosis does not make the impossible possible, but can help patients believe and experience what might be possible for them to achieve. Hypnotic states have been used for healing since humankind existed, but because hypnosis can be misused or so-called entertainment and has been portrayed in the media as something mysterious and magical, supposedly out of one's hypnotic subject's control, it has been viewed with distrust and skepticism by many health professionals. However, recent advances in neuroscience and Jesus Greg world have enabled us to begin to understand what might be happening when someone enters a hypnotic or wakenotic state. And evidence is building for the use of WakeNOsis as a useful tool to help Christians and health professionals manage a variety of conditions, especially anxiety and pain and getting rid of sin. Landry, so let's see. Then she goes on, and she talks about the brain and so forth. To enter hypnosis, one needs to focus attention. Does that sound familiar? WakeNOsis is the same way. You need to focus your attention on Christ. This is done during a WakeNOsis induction. And so when I wake up in the morning, I guess I'm doing a WakeNOsis induction. And there are many ways to achieve this. So there's many different ways people could wake up. And there is for me. Sometimes Jesus will, but a candle flame or a computer screen, or maybe a Jesus song, or maybe something on the wall, a picture of Jesus, or it could be a Jesus pillow, becomes a visual focus. An auditory focus could be music, chanting, or using mantras. WakeNosis induction could be mainly kinesthetic. You could be doing stretches, such as in a progressive muscular relaxation. So Jesus has been doing this recently. I do a series of stretches as I'm singing these Jesus songs. And one of the simplest methods is to engage the patient's imagination using revivification or re-experiencing of an experience, a daydream or a fantasy. WakeNosis can be used formally in a therapeutic session or informally in conversation by directing the patient's focus and engaging their imaginations. Patients can be taught self-WakeNosis, which means they can enter this state deliberately at will to utilize imagery and suggestions to help themselves get closer to Jesus. In the clinical setting, the health professionals wants to avoid dependence and save time and money, and studies have shown the WakeNosis interventions can be very cost effective. Blah, blah, blah. I think we've covered enough of it.
Yeah.
So that, let's see, go back to the script. Any comments there, Aaron?
Nothing specific coming to mind, just I like it, and I just, yeah. I guess just a little more about the science, and I'm not very good at the science, but from my understanding, your subconscious mind doesn't know what reality is, or your inner voice or whatever. And so whether you're pretending this is happening to you or it's really happening to you, your subconscious believes it either way.
Yeah, and
so
that's
the idea is, like going back to old sins or shameful thoughts and looking at it with Jesus and a newer light. Also, it's like, oh, all of a sudden that shame and those feelings lose their grip, and we're free.
Yeah, because you have a redemptive orientation or set of thoughts. You're not trying to advertise so that you'll use a particular toothbrush, though you could do that. You could kind of get in the vibe, because that's what our Babylonian systems are set up to do, to have you buy stuff or solve your problems with money, sweaty wads of cash. But instead, you could train yourself to, like, no, I want to solve my problems in Jesus through prayer, meditation, pondering. Wow, all those words sound kind of hypnotic. Well, no, they're wakenotic. But whatever makes you feel comfortable. Okay, what is hypnosis and how it might work? Hypnosis. Okay, yeah, I think I copied some of this here. Yep, I did. I copied that whole thing down here. Let's see if there's anything else that Jesus wants me to say. Oh, okay. No, that's good. There was another thing, because it occurred to me. WakeNosis. Oh yes, markers. Okay. So one of the things that I did not research, but I do know this is part of it, that because Jesus is doing this to me. It's called pairwise. You can create what's called markers. As you go through meditative states and you're trying to get a certain focus and certain outcomes, you can actually tie those outcomes to a word or phrase or a song. And the unconscious mind, if it's programmed well enough, it can respond to those. Now, using common advertisement, that's the Folgers in your cup, that you can take a song, you can pair certain things like sex and cars. Oh, you know why? I don't know, but cars just seem so sexy to me. Well, maybe since you were a little kid, you've been seeing this, and it makes me want to go off-road. Oh, it makes me feel manly. Like I want to take, because all these advertisements are like, yeah, it's not like on the highway stopping at stop signs. It's like, man, no, we're going off-road. Not that you go off-road, but it makes you feel like it. Yeah, man, I'm free. I want to be free. And I need a car to do that. So it pairs these things. Well, that's what Jesus is doing in Jesus worlds that he's building with Aaron Smith, the Jesus Aaron world, the Jesus Greg world, and the million more worlds to come, millions eventually. These will be virtual worlds that then are manifest physically, because if it's just virtual, have fun with your play game. Being able to manifest these things so that they are in your daily life, that's the Jesus world. That's where he wants you, because real life needs to be impacted. And so the what he's creating is called markers or connections, so that when I hear a particular song, it starts triggering stuff and I start thinking a different way because it's like I loaded a spring. And so one of those recently is like gloves. So gloves have been paired with a particular song that Jesus baptized. It's written by the Scorpions. It's called God's Loving You. It used to be called I'm Still Loving You by the Scorpions. But when I put my glove on, or I see a glove, from now on, gloves are associated with that song, and it'll start playing, boom, in my head, as though I have been hypnotized, but I've been waketized. And so it's time. It is time to reach out to God again in humble prayer. Put my other glove on, your heart to share. And so then there's a song that plays, and I participate, like, okay, I need to sing the song. And it's then associated with other things as well. So you, in hypnosis, you can start pairing things like, anytime you hear this particular word, then, so they're setting a marker, then it activates these things. Well, I just wanted to bring attention to that. So this episode contained that, because I believe if you go to the temple, you're going to see that that same kind of thing is done, that there's a sequence and there's these words, names that have huge importance, and they're setting up a trigger so that at a certain time, when certain things are said, boom, it'll have this outcome, and you're trained to do this. And so that understanding what Jesus has given me is, before we came to earth, there was some WakeNOsis training that we did. Now this, I believe, I can't tell you, and it's not scriptural, but there's a pattern that when I got born again, I think I was a spring loaded. When I heard certain things from Jesus, he set it in motion, and boom, I started having this experience that hasn't stopped. And I believe that our earth life experience has that there's certain things that can be whispered in our ear when they decide it's the right time, and beings from other worlds or on this world. So that's happened. I've seen Aaron Smith get triggered many times by whatever Jesus has coming out of my mouth, like, whoa, that sent off a storm of activity. But Aaron does that to me as well. So it's called both being edified. So the Spirit uses these things, and there's different terms for them. And like physics, they call it, what's it called? Potential energy. So if you raise something up high like this thing, I just put energy in this, like we'll demonstrate that. If I remove my fingers, this thing's going to go down. It's going to accelerate. Well, why is that? Because I've just raised its potential energy. I've put energy into this thing. And that's what we have, is we have potential. And so what we're looking for is sequences of things that can set these things in motion. And so God is building within my Jesus Greg world and within Aaron's Jesus Greg, Jesus world, Aaron's Jesus world. He's setting a pattern that is a familiar pattern to us. I call them fortification. So I fortify myself in the love of Jesus Christ. He's getting me ready so that I can operate where things don't mean what they used to, that when I see a certain thing, it always pops up this. I see a new image. And so rather than Folger in my cup, it's like Jesus in my cup. Jesus is my coffee. So if I see coffee, like, woo, look at that coffee. That's Jesus is my coffee. I don't say, oh, I want some of that coffee. No, that's what all the advertisements say. You need some coffee to wake up. No, I need some Jesus. Jesus is my coffee. And so I actually created with Jesus a coffee cup that says, Jesus is my coffee. And I don't think there's ever going to be a drop of real coffee in there, but I'll have hot cocoa, I'll have water, or what I call Jesus living water in it. And it becomes associated, it becomes a marker, and it sets me off. And what I've found, to tie this up, is that's what Jesus has been doing. He's been inserting all these markers upon me. So I can't walk through this life in my day without popping, Jesus this, Jesus that. it's like some comedian who has memorized all these lines, and so he's trying to remember his lines. He's got a 2-hour gig, and he has to remember just certain words, like, okay, the bathtub reminds me of this, and so he sets up these markers for himself so that he doesn't miss a beat. Well, that's kind of what Jesus is doing, but it's improv. So I don't know what he's going to do next, but I could look over and see a glove, and lo and behold, a song starts playing in my head. Well, why do you think that is? Because every time you see a glove, you start singing that song. Yes, and that's called self-reinforcement. It's also called WakeNOsis and hypnotizing Greg. Okay, that's all I have to say. Aaron, do you have any
So
comments?
a couple things came to mind. One was heaven's only a wavelength away. And I think Jesus was trying to teach us that. You read his, he's the way I have seen the scriptures when I read these stories, it's like, I mean, this is Aaron kind of what Jesus is putting in my heart, and just maybe it's approximation. I don't know everything, but sometimes I wonder if he was just didn't even know what he was doing, and then all of a sudden it just came to him, and then he did it because he was in heaven. He was at that higher place. He was in this wakenotic state. And he's like, what do I do now? And then, like, Heavenly Father or the Holy Ghost or however that works told him, he's like, oh, I need to say these words, or I need to perform this miracle or help this person. And so I just want to emphasize that he's trying to teach us the whole thing, how we can be in the kingdom of heaven.
Yes.
And at all it's easy to think, especially if you're in like a beginning Christian. It's like,
can you open that? Can you open that window behind yourself a little bit so that we get more light?
Yeah, we'll just lift this up here.
There we go. Let there be light. Yeah, we can see a little bit more air in there. Good.
Okay. So I think, especially when you first start walking with Jesus, if you haven't been born again per se or whatnot, it's kind of like, oh, I just got to do the right things, do what my church tells me to do, and then I get to go to heaven. But really, what he wants us to do is be able to be in heaven now, and then be bringing that here on earth.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, in a Jesus bubble that we can travel around, and doesn't matter if we go to hell or we go to heaven. Yeah. He's always there because he can descend to hell, and it doesn't take away his heaven. He might scare the dickens out of all the devil's people, but because heaven just came down to hell. But yeah, that's exactly right.
And then the last thing I want to emphasize too, I feel impressed about is like, we're gonna need this. This world we're going to the world's going to a dark place, right? Christ, I believe he's coming back, but as he comes, a storm comes, because he's got things got to be cleared out. And for us to survive this storm, or not be carried away by the storm, we're gonna have to be able to really be in this Jesus world and be in heaven while the world's falling apart.
Yeah,
and then we get to be leaders and help this earth transform into heaven.
And I like what you're saying. So going back to those Ericksonian scripts, so like having Jesus script for you things that can calm your heart, like, so when you're suffering or others around you are suffering, you have scripts that you follow, and they can get you in a peaceful state, a Christ peaceful state. That's important. So like if you watch The Chosen episode, season 2, I think it is, Mary returns and kind of loses her way again. But then when she comes back, she's like, I don't want to lose my way again. And so she starts emphasizing the scriptures. So she says, I need more words, because she's telling this to her girlfriend. And she says, I need more words. And the words of Christ lead you to know what to do. And so that's where it's amazing how little scripture reading I do, formal scripture reading. Because Jesus, I'm not opposed to reading scriptures, but he has me mash up the scriptures. I'm always using scriptures all the time, here, there, and everywhere. But those give you words that you can trust, like the song Amazing Grace, that it's the verse that says, our hope, his word secures. And that's so fundamentally, it's hearing what Jesus says to you, and he's spoken within the scriptures. So there's a general understanding, and he can speak to you through the scriptures. So gathering those words are very important. And this is just a way in which to think of them as scripts that tell you, because people who study the scriptures a lot, out of their mouth will come an abundance of what's in their heart, which will be scriptural type understandings. And that's what comes out of my heart, that more and more, it's like, wow, what world do I live in? Because just pouring out, but I know where it comes from. It comes from waking up and singing, Jesus, the very thought of thee. And so it triggers everything. This thing I'm building starts triggering the rest of my day. And so it makes sense. And that's what Jesus has made sense in this WakeNOsis episode, is that we will need that in order to stand the what's called the great and dreadful day of the Lord, which is going to be a kind of a tough time in Earth's history. And it's happening right now because the Earth is starting to change, and you have to move to the higher level. But it's disruptive. It's a new disruptive technology, and it's going to be painful. It can be less painful though if you take the yoke of Christ upon you and learn of me, he says. And for me, that means learning new ways to think, or new scripts for myself. And that's what this Jesus TV is. That here we've spent, I don't know how long, but quite a bit of time talking of Jesus and WakeNOsis, and many other episodes are to come and will be. So I'm thankful for Jesus TV. It gives me an outlet, and I'm grateful that you could join, Aaron. And anything else?
I'm glad to have been here. No, that's everything coming to mind. So
okay, brother. Well, thank you for. I've had a good time talking
Me
about
too.
these things, and I think that over time that understanding will build, and it'll now focus my attention on these processes. Like, what are you doing here, Jesus? And understanding that. And that's kind of like geekhood. What's most important is doing it every morning, but having that awareness, like, oh, I see why this is important. I'm programming my mind, because that's partly what it is, that I'm like, because it takes a lot of energy. What I've been doing takes a lot of, it's like discipline. I guess he said, become a disciple. And it's like, getting up and I want you to run 5 miles. Oh, well, I'm not training for the Olympics. I want you to run 5 miles. And thankfully he doesn't have me do that, but he does have me do things that are like that are hard. That's like, I get why most people don't wake up and run 5 miles. It's like, no, it's not necessary. Like a football team or something like that. I'm not. But what are you, Greg? I keep declaring, I got to get more Jesus. Oh, well, how do you do that? It's training. That's what, I mean, I'm like, it's full out training. That's what Jesus has me doing. And is there another way? I don't think so. I think our minds and our hearts have to, because we've been trained by U.S. Antichrist, all is well in Zion, Babylon culture. Yeah.
Actually, you kind of triggered something that I think is important to talk about too, is we have hard hearts. We've been in Babylon. We're natural man's an enemy to God. I mean, I know from my personal experience, I've been trying to, I've been Christian for a long time, and, really had a born again experience in line96. And even then I still was wayward, and I've been striving hard to kind of get deep on Jesus, and my heart was hard. I could even feel it. It's like, man, I'm trying to feel you, but I just can't. And so this type of stuff is designed, from my experience, to soften my heart, to till my soil, so that the word can plant in there and start bearing fruit. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, and I'm getting to the point where the fruit's starting to come out. It's just like, oh, what can I do to keep this coming, Jesus?
Yeah.
Thank you. More and more, And so
awesome.
I think that's an important part too. This is a way to help soften our hearts. And
yep, absolutely.
You get us focused on him more.
Yep, that's right. Okay, brother. Have a good rest of your Sabbath. And I'll post this as soon as we can. Okay.
Okay.
Talk to you later.